What's up, guys? It's KB. Make sure you subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. Click the bell icon down below so you don't miss a single video from us. And thanks for tuning in to another video from Underground Sports Philadelphia. Now let's get into it.
Philadelphia, baby, you're gonna love it. Best sports fans in the world. Actually, the worst, but that's what makes them the best.
Welcome back to Top Bins, the show bringing you all the action from the Premier League, SerieA, England, and Italy. I'm your host, Matt, joined by my co-host, Redacted, out on bail, out on temporary leave. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, man don't know about no Dom.
All right,
It's
we're not doing
DP.
the accent. We're not doing the accent.
What's up? In the studio today.
Live and in the flesh.
Woo.
Our first Top Bins in person
In a long time.
in a very, very long time. It was the 5-year anniversary of Underground Sports Philadelphia as a whole. So we're all together tonight to celebrate that and do the main pod, which I would encourage you to check out. Because we're also previewing the Super Bowl. So maybe you're into that.
A little bit of hand egg, right?
Yeah, a little hand egg, if you will. But, you know, obviously, the soccer don't stop. The football don't stop. We'll be talking a little bit about the week that was. Not a great week for us personally, as far as our favorite team goes. And that's where we're going to start tonight in Italy. Inter 1, Milan 0. The Milan derby over the weekend. One of the most anticipated games of the Italian calendar every year. Always look for when these games pop onto our screen. It was, we talked a little bit earlier about this. I felt like it was a very uninspiring performance by Milan. I did not think that they created nearly enough. I thought they were actually lucky that this wasn't 2 or 3-0. A few marginal offside decisions, which were offsides, of course, but still close calls. And I think Inter really were just in cruise control for a lot of this game, especially that first half. I felt like it was very much all Inter, and this Milan team has become sort of a shadow of themselves and where they've been pre-World Cup.
Pioli's trying to get them out of the funk they're in, so he's trying new things with formation switches. And when you're switching a formation mid-season, that is a sign of your manager hitting the panic button almost. It's you practice and you train so much to really solidify tactics that you're setting up for a specific formation, and now you're completely switching it. Not only that, in one of the center midfield spots, you're playing a right winger, and then you're playing a right back in a right mid spot where he's expected to get up and down the field more instead of him just staying back like he normally does in a back four. You're playing a young center back that is still showing so many mistakes in game. When you have another young center back that you spent a lot of money for, and he's not getting any playing time. I mean, he got in, and when he came in, he looked better than the one who started over him. I mean, I really don't know what it is now. It's just a culmination of a bunch of different things with Milan. There's post World Cup, drop in form. The coach is losing control of the team in a little bit. The morale is low. Young players aren't getting the time that they need to get up to league speed, and players that seem to have a lot of promise have not been able to prove themselves yet. It's really, really, really concerning. I mean, and even at that, Milan only lost 1-0. Like you said, marginal offsides. The best chance of the game, Giroud takes a bad touch on a layoff from Leao, and completely screws up that chance. And Milan is still getting chances, but they're not taking advantage of converting the chances that the other teams are giving when they're making mistakes. And that's what a good team needs to do, is capitalize on another team's mistakes. And I wish I had an answer. That's the thing. I don't know what the answer is. There's rumors of coaching changes and this and that, but it's people want Redbird and Cardinale to sell the team. I've brought back the "We Are So Rich" memes because that's just what it seems. It's giving me weird flashbacks of 2013-14 when you're on the precipice of falling into another one of those terrible, consecutive years of bad form, finishing 6th, 7th, even worse. Like, it's very concerning right now.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that Milan have had this drop off mid-season. Sometimes you see teams for the next year they go into. So think of Liverpool, right? Like that's obviously my example, but like last year challenging for everything. 2 games away from a quadruple, and then this year just a completely different team. It's more common to see that rather than go away for a month. For this World Cup break and come back, and it's so different. Just looking even to like underlying numbers. Like expected goals against. 2 of their highest. Or lowest or worst performance, however you want to put it, like 3.1, 2.2. Those are high end numbers for them to be conceding for the whole season. The last 3 games, here's their expected goals in each game: 0.3, 0.6, 0.7. The game before that 1.4, then 0.9. Like that's a terrible run. You look through the first half, even like 3 quarters of the season. Before the World Cup break. They're hitting numbers like that maybe once or twice, in that span. And you're talking like 20 games. They've continually now, each game after the break, have looked really bad. And
I'm pretty
I think
sure
that's
that
the concerning part. It's not common for mid-season without it being like an injury crisis, which Milan don't really have. Like obviously Magnan has been out, but he was out even before the World Cup.
There's a weird air like around that whole thing too. The fact that that it's still like postponing of that injury.
I read today that they're hopeful that he'll be back for March 8th for the second leg against Spurs, because his original return date was in the winter, and then it got pushed to like sort of a hard date of February 14th or 15th, whichever day they play, was when he was supposed to return. And yeah, it's now pushed to early March, and it's like a knee injury, right? So like that's it's something like lower body for sure. It's like knee or ankle. I can't remember which one, but it is concerning, when you consider like there does seem to be like a common setback. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned too, like, they've only played a 3-back one other time this season against Cremonese, actually, one of like right before the World Cup break.
And then they draw that game.
Yeah, it was 0-0, and then they tried it a few weeks ago too in the Coppa Italia.
Yeah.
When they lost to Torino, it's a 10-man Torino, of course, too. So yeah, it's a departure from how they played. Like you have the Rafa Leao stuff too. He doesn't get started in the last 2 games, and you have your most effective player and one of the best players in SerieA not starting.
While Pioli's coming out and publicly saying like he needs more from him, and like being very critical of him, and saying a lot of things that are concerning.
I think if I'm reading that, yes, there's like I would have to imagine that there's a lot of rumors about him leaving this summer, and I think if Milan are smart, they should actually really entertain that, because if there's been one misstep over the last 2 or 3 seasons with Milan and how they've sort of retooled this team, is that they have let a lot of transfer fees kind of walk out the door, right? You've let a lot of guys go for free that you could have recouped some money for, reinvest in the squad a little bit better, and maybe you'd be in a better position, healthier position this season if you'd been able to refresh the squad a little bit more. So I think that's been a big area of concern that we've talked about too, is that, Luis Castillo over the summer have not adequately replaced him. Mm-hmm. I can tell you Divock Origi is like a nice guy and has given me some like beautiful moments in my life. He's not a reliable forward. He just isn't. He's a good like bench option and can give you like some big moments every now and again, but is not someone that should be starting in a Milan derby, in my opinion, mm-hmm. right? Like I just don't know that that's really the spot for him, and that you're so dependent on Giroud still. Like I think they're like bigger picture roster concerns. Even still, though, this team is performing very well at the start of the season, and it's just kind of mystifying that they've had this drop off in form, and it's not just one area either. Like it's across the board. I think has been the big concern. And again, this game was slightly better in that they were able to limit Inter Milan, but there's this great quote from Rafa Benitez where he talks about sometimes when you have these like, and it's been the same case with Liverpool this season. I've thought about a lot too, where it's like, if you don't have like the right quality, if you don't have the right everything, it's like trying to sleep with too short of a blanket. No matter which way you pull it, you're going to be uncomfortable. If you try and cover your feet, your torso is going to be uncovered. Then you try and pull that up, well, now your feet are uncovered. Like you're constantly yo-yoing between trying to be more defensively solid, but now you can't create anything. To okay, well let's move the slider the other way and let's try and focus on attack. Well, now you're conceding too much. You're like, it just happens sometimes where when you don't have that quality that you're maybe used to having or that you did have once before, and there's a drop off there that it's hard to find that like balancing act again and find your common ground. I think that's where Milan are at right now too.
I saw an interesting take online. Somebody was saying that Gazidis was the actual glue that kind of held everything together within the football operations project of Milan, because like ever since he kind of left and Maldini has had full range now, like I'm one to, always have support for Maldini, but like it seems like he's not handled this as well without Gazidis kind of being there by his side and like talking about a lot of this. Of course, it doesn't help when you have owners that don't want to spend the money for some of the bigger signings that they may want. Like we're talking about a Maldini that flew to Ibiza so that he could meet with Teo Hernandez to convince him to sign, right? Like Maldini has shown that he can make the big moves. I feel like he just needs somebody in place to give him the okay.
Maldini is also, for being like a executive, still pretty inexperienced.
Yeah.
Like he's someone like, that has not had a lot of time and a ton of experience doing these types of things. And I think it's not an easy transition to make. And not everyone is cut out for like being at the very top level. Like Maldini, I think is very good, probably at like interpersonal stuff. I think negotiating with players, because he has such obviously like a ton of esteem for being such a great player. And I think he has a great understanding too, like naturally as you would, of guys and their motivations and what fulfills them and how to like connect with them still. Like I think those are just kind of ever-present things that are always going to be relevant to him. But it is a different thing when you're like being like the director of the team rather than just like an executive who's helping make like crucial signings, identify targets, identify areas of improvement, like ways to make the team better. So yeah, and the opposite side of this is that Inter, are the only team left standing now in, this kind of top four race that have started to put like consistent results together. We've, I think at times called them like the Jekyll and Hyde team like we had for Lazio last season, although Lazio started to reclaim that title a little bit even. Inter, I think, on any given day, for me, have been one of the best teams in SerieA this year, and that they can beat anyone. They're the only team that can say that they beat Napoli domestically this season in the league at least. So, I think it's a good result for them. Obviously, I think, and we'll touch on Napoli a little bit, but just Napoli seems so untouchable in terms of where they go. We talked a little bit about Napoli in the Champions League. I think Inter, maybe, it's just the ability, I think, for them for one game to have like a really, really strong performance. And I think there's not too many teams in Europe that I think can match them on their best day. It's just, when do you get those best days? How often do you get them, and consistently? But they for me have like a really high ceiling in terms of how they can perform. But it's just too varied. But I think that can, if you just catch the right results in like a cup competition, which you're seeing right now with them too in the Coppa Italia, that could obviously lead to silverware.
Shall we talk about Napoli?
Yeah, let's talk about Napoli, because they win again at the weekend. It's the familiar faces, Kvaratskhelia and Osimhen, that get the goals and
They're so good,
so involved with one another. And yeah, I think it's obvious to me now too that they're kind of just on the title charge, and they're the 13 points clear. There's still a good chunk of season left. Like we just barely eclipsed the halfway mark, but it is hard to see them kind of slipping up in any way here, or anyone's really been consistent enough to catch them. I feel like everyone we talk about from 2 to 6, it's like, well, we just have not seen consistency. Napoli have just really taken advantage of that fact, and they've had such a historic start to the season too.
They have almost a full month's worth of wins, like lead on every team. That's crazy. Like it would take such a huge collapse for them to give up a lot of these points to even places 2 through 4. It's, with the consistency that they've shown, and, the fact that they have more than one weapon in the attack, it's really their Scudetto to win. I don't see another team catching up to them, even with how good Inter has been, and Inter has a ton of threats on their team. I mean, it just the way that Napoli have just been so consistent. It doesn't matter who they're playing, right? When they're playing the smaller clubs, the mid-table and lower-table teams, they're winning by 3-4 goals. When they're playing the big teams, they're normally winning and grinding out a win, or they surprise the big team and smash them, right? The only time that we really didn't see that was when they played Inter. So, like, this team is just rolling. I feel like we just say the same thing about them every week, and it's true. Like, literally every single week, they're playing really, really well.
Yeah, on both sides of the ball, too, like, tag-wise, defensively, too. It's another clean sheet for them. And, they don't have the best defensive record in SerieA, but they are, one of the 2 or 3 best teams in SerieA this season at limiting chances, shots on target, and all those metrics that you want to be good at. And I think now, too, it starts to become a discussion about, like, it's too early to say this, of course, but I think we'll be talking about it in May and June, like, their place kind of in, Italian, like, top flight history in terms of, like, how dominant of a title win this could be. There's still a lot of ways to go here, but in terms of, like, what they could potentially achieve, it's a lot. There's just a lot there. And, Kvaradona, too, is, like, obviously everyone's going to be signing of the season, but he's just been such a gem, just such a gem of a player. He's got 8 goals, 9 assists, very unselfishly gives one up to Osimhen over the weekend, and you can see their connection and how strong it is and what, like, great chemistry they have. Osimhen actually out-jumped Ronaldo's very famous Sampdoria jump by, like, 0.02 meters over the weekend to win his header. So we don't have to listen to that nonsense anymore. That's in our rearview mirror now. But yeah, I think for me, like, again, just watching them play and how good they've been. They've passed every test along the way, and Spezia are sort of circling the drain a little bit, which is you would concern me if I'm a Spezia fan, because that relegation zone is looking bigger and bigger in terms of its pull towards you lately. But Napoli have just been great to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing them in the Champions League and seeing how they get on, because, like we've talked about, I think they got a decent shot at it.
Yeah.
I really do.
It would be really interesting to see Napoli pull off the double if that's the case. It would be really, really interesting. That would be really cool to see.
Don't get to see that very often, especially from an Italian team.
Yeah, I think really the last time you've seen a team kind of pull off a double like that is, Inter when they won the treble.
Yeah.
Juve probably pulled off a double, but it's a domestic double. It didn't include the Champions League trophy.
Yeah,
so.
Juve did the domestic double quite a few times.
Yeah, but a double with the Champions League is really cool to see. So, it's always such a stigma if you're a fan of an Italian team to root for another Italian team as well. They're always like, "Oh, how can you vote for or root for somebody else? We root for our own," type deal. Like, no, I would love to see Napoli like have that kind of success in Europe.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Because God knows my team isn't going to be successful in Europe this year, so I might as well find somebody else to latch on to.
It is in the history of the Tottenham to beat Manchester City 1-0. Let's just talk real quickly about Roma, too, because they're a team that I found interesting.
Tammy
Abraham, he took it right out of the words right out of my mouth. They beat Empoli 2-0, sort of solidify their place back in the top 4, because that's a constant shuffle in Italy every Saturday and Sunday now. We're just constantly the live table shuffling everyone around. Tammy Abraham has been really good since returning from the World Cup. 3 goals and 2 assists. He has 7 goals, 4 assists total in the season in SerieA. So he was one of the players I think that was missing a lot of big chances in the beginning of the year. If you look at like Roma's expected goal difference, expected goal numbers, like they've really been underperforming in that department. They've actually been very similar to like Napoli's expected output, but have just not been able to have the same quality of finishing at times, and sometimes luck too. That becomes part of it. But they've been inconsistent at moments. I still think it's a team that, like, talent and quality wise is probably not actually the 3rd best team in Italy. But yet they've performed at that standard that they are sitting in the 3rd spot. They would be qualifying for Champions League right now. Like, I think those are things that deserve a lot of credit for. And I think if Tammy Abraham hits like that gear that we've seen him be like in SerieA last year, especially, like, I think that could be a real impetus for them firmly finishing in the top 4 and being one of the top teams in Italy this year, because I think I think again that's really all they missed from the first part of this season was that they just were not reliably scoring goals. And, if they get that back, that's a huge boost.
Roma put a lot of faith in Tammy as well. They sold Nicolo Zaniolo to Galatasaray, so the bulk of the goal scoring is going to have to come from him and from some of the supporting cast. But he's another one of those guys who made the move to the Premier League or from the Premier League to SerieA and has kind of flourished and almost like revitalized his career. Kind of like stagnated at Chelsea. In recent times, it's like him and Tomori. They came over to SerieA and they kind of have burst onto the scene bigger than they could in England. And that's even like guys like Chris Smalling years ago, who was like kind of, a top center back with Manchester United at the time. But when he went to Roma, I mean, he was on a different level. Like, he was one of the best center backs in the league at the time. So, Tammy's just another one of those players. He makes the move. He fits the league real well. He gets along with his coach. The system that they play, fits his play style. And you see the fruits of that. And their success is directly related to how well he's been playing.
Yeah, I think where they go, as he goes, they go. I think that's going to be the story there, over the second half of the season for Roma. So, looking forward to all that. Let's jump over to England. We had a managerial change, of course. Everton hiring Sean Dyche. That was not official last week, but it felt very likely. I think we mentioned it on the show that he was a very likely candidate. No more Frank Lampard. They beat Arsenal. Arsenal have not historically been winners at Goodison Park. Doesn't help when you have new manager bounce. Everton looked like a completely different team against Arsenal. Much more composed, just better all around. Everything about them looked much improved, even just a short week. And I think it's so funny to me. Like you see these moments, and it just really tells you that sometimes confidence and just having like a different voice, like what a difference that can make to like an environment. And it's so clear that's what happened here. But it's the first big kind of I don't know. It's the first time we've ever seen Arsenal like lose in a way that like is like the only other loss this season was to Manchester United in a game that was a little frustrating. But it's the first time that you really felt like they really got outperformed and also like felt like one that got away from them. And I'm just curious how they like as a team respond to that. Of course, they have some big games coming up. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they bounce back, because they do have Manchester City in the next week, and that's obviously going to be a massive game on both sides.
Yeah, I think it was just one of those trap games where they come into it like with the mentality like, oh, it's just Everton, like everybody's beating Everton. They have a new manager. This should be easy for us. And Everton kind of catches them on the on the wrong foot, and it just happened to be that day. I don't think they're as a fan or as a member of the club, I don't think there's cause for panic or concern or anything. Just fix the things you need to fix it in training, and like you said, prepare for Man City, because that game is obviously big. They got some help this week from
an unlikely
Tottenham,
friend in Tottenham. Just on Arsenal, I think I like I said, I'm really curious to see how they respond to this, because they have not had to face like the adversity like this year. Like it's all looked very easy for them in a good way. I don't mean that as like a negative thing, but I just mean like they've looked very comfortable. They look very happy, and they've gotten these big emotional momentum wins. They had against Manchester United the week before or last week. It all blends together at this point. But they had these like big comebacks, so they have these really tight games that they're getting the like title winning montage moments. And I think it's easy to forget sometimes within those title winning seasons that there can be these blips, and it's so important how you respond for them. And it is a young team that does not have all the experience that some other like past title winning teams necessarily have. And so to me, it's going to be very crucial to see how they respond to all this pressure now, because again, like you said, they got a little bit of a favor from Spurs, who beat Manchester City 1-0. So at least Manchester City doesn't make up ground on them. But Harry Kane breaks Jimmy Greaves' record for being Spurs' top goal scorer. Obviously now, like the bigger sight is Alan Shearer's goal scoring record. We'll see if he gets there.
What a great trophy for Tottenham.
I think it's really interesting to me because Harry Kane is such a fascinating player because he's obviously so talented. He's very good. He's one of the best strikers I've seen, especially in England. I like the only striker I think is like 100% ahead of him. That I don't think it's a debate. Is Thierry Henry. On like pure talent too, I would say like Luis Suarez is like in a much different category. Like
You put him above Wayne Rooney?
Thierry Henry,
No.
Luis Suarez.
No, Harry Kane.
I would put him. I think they're on the same tier to me. Like I think they are in. I think they're in the comparable players at this point. Like what he's done is just impressive. Like he obviously he doesn't have the like silverware to show for it, which isn't totally his fault either. Like it's such a hard thing. Like
Quality wise, yeah. I mean, the way that Kane plays as a center forward, more than just the goal scoring, but his distribution and helping the build up play and releasing the wingers down the sides. It's definitely very comparable to Rooney.
yeah, I think he's just, and I would say too, like his like peak as a goal scorer is probably higher than Rooney's ability was as well. Like this is a guy that's hit like high 20s like goal marks with regularity in the Premier League, and that was never really Rooney's thing. Like he maybe had like 1 or 2 seasons like that, but Rooney was always a little bit more of even like a secondary striker, rather than like the primary guy. He was a bit more of like a glue attacker. Like he was one that the game kind of like revolved around Rooney and his movement, and he was not always like the finisher, right? Like if you look at like Manchester United's history, like a lot of times he's partnered with like Carlos Tevez, Ruud van Nistelrooy,
Robin van Persie,
Cristiano Ronaldo, these guys that are more known for like goal scoring prowess than him. But he's like great at that support, and he's great at late runs, and he's a good goal scorer himself too. I don't want to diminish his ability, but I think Harry Kane is. I think it's really Harry Kane and Rooney and Aguero, in like sort of that tier below Thierry Henry. Because I think that you have to have like longevity too. Like Luis Suarez is one of the most talented players I've ever seen play in my life, but just did not have the like long-standing history in the league like those guys had. He only plays in England for like 3-4 seasons. So it's like it's hard to say that he's on the same level or better if you're looking at it from like a historical aspect. But for Manchester City in this game, I think a sloppier performance than what's been typical of them in years past, but has been one of the worrying things for me this year with them is like these moments where they just don't look as organized as we're used to seeing them, and there's a little bit more chaos. And then, I mean, obviously, too, we get the breaking story this week that they've been charged with like 100 breaches of financial rules, and we have no clue where that investigation is going to go. And I imagine it's going to take a long time to be resolved because it's a massive legal question, and it's very important for the league, I think, to get this right. I would just say, as a totally not unbiased person, it's obvious that they've been doing something to cook the books, so to speak, right? Like to add money in other ways, in other forms. So
economic levers
for sure. And I would just like to see, I'd like to see some accountability for that. That's all I'm going to say. But I think there's kind of a cloud a little bit over City right now, and there has been for most of this year. And I think back to the summer when we were previewing the season, and I think we both felt that Manchester City and Liverpool could probably take a small step back from where they were. Like I didn't totally anticipate them being in like the mid 90 point range. Maybe it's just gonna be like mid to high 80s, just because there was a lot of turnover within the team, and I think both of them have struggled this year at times. Now City have looked better overall and still have the chance at the title. For as much doom and gloom as I think we've talked about them, like generally, and people have talked about them generally, they're still within 5 points of the title. And like have 2 games against Arsenal. They're still very much in the race, and they're still a team I think could break off 9 or 10 wins in a row, and we wouldn't be surprised. But I do wonder if there's just so much change, and I think you have the João Cancelo departure. Kyle Walker at different times this year too has been sort of, it seems like, at least in the background, feuding with Pep a little bit, or there's been some aggression or like rift there. De Bruyne hasn't looked as like otherworldly this year either, and you wonder if just maybe like fatigue is setting in. Like he's just played a lot over the last few years, and just looks a little bit like lacking for timing. At least in recent weeks he has. So yeah, I think it's it's a little concerning for City, but they've not gone to Spurs and won recently. That has just been like not the method for them. Like Spurs have been usually a pretty big help to who's ever in the title race against Manchester City, because they frequently have taken points off of them. They're just one of those teams, and some teams, that's just the way it is. You have guys that you can't get points against. So, got to pour it out for a real one. Jesse Marsch, gone but certainly not forgotten. He relieved of duties at Leeds. Considering their league position, I'm not surprised, but I think it should be mentioned that he came in last year to a team that had a ton of injury issues and had conceded a ton of goals, and was able to reshape that team in the last 3 months of the season and get them to stay up when it looked like they were definitely going to be relegated. So I think he deserves some credit for that work. But it's weird because I've watched Leeds a few times this season. I watched the most recent game this week, I think it's Nottingham Forest, and the team played well. It's just these little moments where like someone just doesn't have the right touch, not the right finish. These little like moments of quality that are just, it's hard to really lay at the feet of the manager, right? Like, because clearly if your system is working and creating those chances, it's up to the players to maybe have a little bit more like final quality, and they just haven't had that in moments, which I think certainly could be a little frustrating for Jesse Marsch. But Leeds today, though, rebounded pretty well, actually. They get a 2-2 draw with Manchester United.
That's a nice result.
It is a good result, and they play each other again in like the next week, because that's just the way the Premier League has worked lately, where you have like City and Spurs playing each other like within quick order. Now Leeds and Manchester United. Keylor Navas had his debut in that game and looked amazing. Who knew? Who knew a guy that's won multiple Champions Leagues is going to be really, really good at it, at saving the ball? Who knew? That's really surprising to me. So.
Man. Do you think the Americans that got brought in get liquidated once a new manager comes in?
No shot, because Tyler Adams is still very important to that team.
What about Weston?
I think Weston is good too. I think McKennie is a good midfielder. He's a little inconsistent, especially from his time at Juventus. Like, he had games where he looked like the best midfielder on that team. He also had games where he looked like a complete passenger. Like, he just has, he's a very like hot and cold player, and I do think he's a very like good like physical midfielder. Like, he's good at winning like individual challenges. Like, certainly can't complain about energy with him, and that sort of suits the Premier League style. But there were even a few times today watching them where like him and Tyler Adams both like are not always like in like the high pressure like final third situations, picking the right pass, like or trying something a little too elaborate. Like, sometimes they need to like focus on more the simple aspect. So I'm curious to see where Leeds go from here, who they hire, and because they're obviously they're in a little bit of a tough situation again in terms of where they sit on the table. Just outside the relegation zone, which right now is Everton, Bournemouth, and Southampton in it. But Leeds are just a point above Everton, so there's room, there's room to improve for them, and I'm curious to see just who they get in, because that's going to be a very important hire, because you expect with Everton to probably improve over the course of the year, with Sean Dyche now, where you have like almost a half a season to work with that. Wolves have improved. They beat Liverpool over the weekend pretty soundly, and they've been kind of on an uptick ever since they got Lopetegui. And we talked about this too like a few weeks ago. At that point, a lot of these teams that were in the relegation zone hadn't fired their manager. Now pretty much everyone has, except for West Ham. Everyone in the bottom six has changed manager this year. Wolves, Leeds, Everton, Bournemouth, Southampton have all changed. Even Aston Villa, who were like in that sort of range earlier, now who sit 11th in the table, they get Unai Emery, and like teams have not been afraid of chopping and changing when they felt like they've had to. And I wonder if West Ham, certainly they have the quality, but have just not had like the total consistency this year. I do wonder. David Moyes' job is already, I think, under some scrutiny. I wonder where that goes from there. They did get a good point against Newcastle over the weekend. That's a good result in general terms, but it's definitely been a huge underperformance for West Ham this year.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking ahead to the weekend, we've got some good games, especially in England. Like I mentioned, Leeds and Manchester United play again this Sunday. Monday, you have the Merseyside derby between Liverpool and Everton. The big showstopper, though, is next Wednesday. We have Arsenal and Manchester City. Title challenge at the top. you love it. We got to see them play in the FA Cup a few weeks ago, and that was fun. It was a really, really good game that Manchester City ended up winning. So I'm looking forward to one with a little more stakes in terms of, the title and the league, and I think there's going to be a lot there. So there's plenty to keep your eyes on. Juventus Fiorentina to look out for this weekend in Italy.
It's a good game.
Lazio Atalanta, a really important top 4 game. And then of course we have the return to the Champions League, right? Like when Valentine's Day rolls around, you start to get these fixtures back. Dom, for your Valentine's Day treat, you got Milan, Tottenham. That's going to be great.
I'm completely focused on spending the day with my fiance. I'm not even going to watch the game. It's
just because you love her so much. It
it's
certainly has nothing to do with Milan's form.
Only because I love her so much, and we're getting married, in December. That I want to set that up well with a nice Valentine's Day. I just can't even think about Milan that day.
Pontari, wife guy.
Yeah.
PSG Bayern that day as well, which is really that's going to be a good one. Kylian Mbappe is apparently dealing with a thigh injury. Julian Nagelsmann does not believe that, though. He's calling bullshit and saying that Kylian Mbappe will definitely be playing on Tuesday. Wednesday, you got Dortmund, Chelsea, and Club Brugge and Benfica. A little bit of a hipster day, I would call it, except for Chelsea. It's like, oh, well, this is actually this really cool team from Belgium you've never heard of, but they're really cool. You should look them up. So that's this week in Champions League. Next week, you obviously have Liverpool, Real Madrid, Frankfurt, Napoli, Inter, Porto, Leipzig, and Man City. We'll get to them when we get to them. I did already bet against Liverpool advancing. I bet some money on Real Madrid beating them. So.
That's never a bad bet.
Yeah. It pains me to say, but
I mean, you learned last year putting your money in Real Madrid is a
I didn't
investment.
I didn't bet on them to win the Champions League just because they haven't been as imperious this year. But I do think they're certainly good enough to be beating this Liverpool team, which has just looked pathetic over the last few weeks. So that's where I'm at. I think I'm still gonna get myself involved with a Napoli future bet. I think that's where my money is calling. But
as long as the odds are still there, I mean, it's not a.
I think they're still plus 1,200. So,
Yeah.
Which I think is right around where Madrid were at this time last year. It was around 1,200 or 1,500. I can't quite remember, but we got Champions League back. Premier League games are looking really tasty. We got some good SerieA stuff at the weekend as well. Dom, anything to say before we get it? Because it's Super Bowl weekend for us too, so that is certainly gonna take up a lot of our time. But anything to say before we get out of here?
No, actually, follow me on Twitch. I don't know when I'm gonna stream again. However, I do have some ideas on potentially getting some of these underground sports guys involved with the Twitch streams or some content for YouTube. So follow the YouTube pages, Underground Sports YouTube page, and follow my YouTube page, actually. Search a Hairy Ape on Twitter. Search a Hairy Ape on YouTube. Go subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss out on any content when I do upload content.
You love to
Go
see
Birds.
It. Go Birds. Go Liverpool. Forza Milan. We'll see.
Yeah. It's very melancholy over
This was a marathon evening for us in terms of podcast content. So, I think in some ways we did good today. We put in a lot of good work, a lot of good hours. Check out the main show to hear us reminisce a little bit on the past 5 years that was. If you're into American football, of course, preview the Super Bowl there. Give out some, I think, very astute betting advice as well.
I may end up back in jail.
Dom may end up back in jail, but we'll let you know next week his status, if he's out on remand or not. But until next week, we'll see you post Champions League, post Manchester City Arsenal, as Dom looks like an absolute nightmare. If you want to look on YouTube to see just a true.
Where is this? There we go.
It's still pretty scary. He's wearing a balaclava. Not a baklava, of course. If Dom was wearing baklava, my stomach would be grumbling a lot more. But we'll talk to you next week after the games, after all that, to break it all down. Until then, see ya.